probably enable pretty soon.
And we are live.
Great. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. My name is Ujjaval Gandhi. I'm coming to you live from India, and I'm really excited to be hosting this session on best practices for teaching QGIS remotely. We just heard from David, and this kind of ties in nicely with his experiences, what he had to say. So this session is slightly different than others. If you're watching on YouTube, you can obviously continue to do so, but we would love for you to come and join this Zoom session and share your experience. It's a more interactive session where we would love to kind of chat and discuss and share best practices. So if you've been teaching using QGIS, or if you have experience with that you'd like to share, please join the Zoom session, and you'll find the link on the website. A brief intro about me. I'm based in India. I write free and open tutorials at qgistutorials.com. I've been doing that for over a decade now. I recently started my own company that's completely focused on training. It's one of the QGIS certifying organizations. So we do provide official QGIS certificates for all the participants who take the training. And I also do Python for spatial analysis and Google Authentic training. I'm also a visiting researcher at University of Johannesburg, and by visiting now, it's online. So I'll be teaching that GIS applications for urban planning using QGIS later this year. So let's just think back to start of the year, right? If you can, this is how my training used to look like. We were all huddled together in a conference room without masks, all in person. It was great, right? I could just walk around to anybody who had a problem. We could, interact and, spend the whole day learning about QGIS. But obviously this has changed. And I loved teaching this way. And I was kind of a strong believer of kind of doing in-person trainings. And I would love to kind of continue doing that. But, the reality now is that my trainings look like this. And I could relate to what David said about the mad scramble that we had switching from offline to online mode. And being I just had left my job and started this online, the training business, and suddenly being faced with this reality where, online is the only possibility. So I had to quickly figure out how to deal with that. And in a way, it kind of, it's great. You can see every weekend I'm hosting a class, and I have participants from across the globe in different time zones with a much more diverse group versus a very local group earlier. But it also presents a challenge, right? You just have a small window into the world. Everybody's remote. There are definitely technical challenges. You need to adapt your teaching to this mode. But I've been doing this quite often over the last 4 months or so. And over time, with a lot of trial and errors, I figured out a kind of way it kind of works quite well. And I'm a bit of a convert now, and I really feel that online training can really be as effective as in-person training. So I want to share the start of the session by just sharing some of my experiences and some of the things that I've figured out doing these sessions. So the first one, I think there's been a lot of research and people have talked about it, that learning online poses a lot more cognitive load. It's much more stressful. So doing an 8-hour long workshop online is definitely stressing, both for the teacher as well as the participants. So 4 hours is probably the maximum limit to this kind of online session where it can be effective. The shorter, the better, but with logistics, I think I was able to split my 8-hour sessions into 2 4-hour weekend sessions, and that works. That also, along in the sessions, I definitely take plenty of breaks. I remember in my in-person classes, the people would come up to me and say, hey, I have a questions, or we would just, chat over coffee or have lunch together. And there was a lot of interesting discussion that came up. So I try to replicate that in the online sessions where we take fairly long breaks and though I encourage people to say, hey, you can feel free to just take the break, take care of some household chores if you had to, and come back fresh. But I stick around and, we chat anything related to, unrelated to the curriculum. And, it really helps people connect. We learn from each other, and people definitely tell me that this is as valuable as the formal curriculum that we have. In the early days, people were not really used to having online sessions. I wasted much of precious time during the class debugging video issues, screen sharing issues. So I kind of now invite people a day before to a test session. And we just test that if the audio and video works well, if they know how to share the screen. In my Python class, I also expect people to have much more elaborate environment setup. So this also acts as a way for me to verify that they've got the installs correctly. And this really works well. And since I started doing this, we never waste a minute during the actual class, and really helps the flow of the class well. Another thing similar to what David said, keeping everything in a single place really helps. In the early days, I was really tempted to say, hey, let's use calendar for scheduling. Let's use chat for doing this. I will send this in a doc here, and information scattered all across. And with people being in different time zones, it's asynchronous. It's easy to miss a calendar invite. So it's just best practice to just have everything at one place. And in all communication, you route it through that. And you could use Moodle, for example, but I settled on using a secure page on my website. And I just post the schedule, the course materials, even the notes that we take during the class videos, everything is up there. And the page stays up for a long time, so people will come back and refer to it. So definitely adopt this. It could be even a shared Google Doc that could be a central place for all the information. Another thing that really helped me was when you are teaching in person, you get a lot of non-verbal cues. If I'm talking and explaining a concept and I get blank stares back, I know that it's not getting through. And in online teaching, you don't get that feedback. One thing that I found really useful is that I'm often sharing my screen and doing this hands-on exercises with people. I encourage them to keep the videos on. And Zoom allows you to have this overlay. And as I'm teaching, I could see the faces, I could see people nodding their head, and I get some cues, and that helps. It's obviously not 100% as great as in person, but definitely as an instructor, this is really helpful. One of the worst sessions that I've taught is where everybody had the video off and I was just talking to a void. Right? That is definitely not what you want. So that's definitely should definitely try doing that. So this was some of my takeaways. I could relate to some of the stuff that David had said, but there are a lot of people who've been teaching QGIS. I would love to hear your experiences, and we'll want to discuss and learn more about that. So once again, if you're watching this on live stream and you want to join us, please join us on this Zoom session, and we can start. But for now, maybe I can hand it back to Michelle, and we can just go around and talk about some of the experiences that other participants have.
All right, great. Thanks for that presentation to get us situated. I'm not exactly sure where to start the discussion, so any ideas from the group? Oh, really quickly, for those of you who had the live stream on YouTube, please close that tab or turn off the audio because we're getting some echo from that coming through people's mics. So go ahead and make sure you've got that YouTube session closed so we're not getting the 20-second audio delay over there.
And that's for the people in Zoom, people watching on YouTube.
Yeah, keep your volume on.
I was wondering if I could start just with a question for David. In your setting of the students that you had, you mentioned that you were somewhat surprised that there weren't issues installing the software. What was the mix of like Windows and PC, or Windows and Mac? What's the other one? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have exact numbers, but I think it was probably about 50-50.
Okay.
A couple of students already had brought their laptops to class and wanted to run it that way. So I saw some of the machines, so probably 50-50.
Yeah, thanks, David, for that talk. I really enjoyed it. And Ujaval, that was a great introduction. And I'm wondering if there are any thoughts on maximum size of an online class. I think obviously it's got to be smaller than a face-to-face maximum. And so it looked like Ujaval, for your courses, you looked like you had maybe 6 or 8 people. Is that kind of what you're gearing towards these days?
Yeah, I think 10 is probably the kind of a limit for kind of a good experience, where, because my sessions are all hands-on. I'm helping people as they work through the exercises, and even smaller for more kind of intro to programming classes where you need more hands-on support to people. And I think more than 10, you can definitely go more than that, but then it becomes more of a one-way delivery. And I think, as David said, it's probably better done via video, recorded video, and then you could have more interactive session later on. So for a live interactive session, maybe 10 is kind of a good number.
So how do you shift from doing, like, if you work really hands-on in person, like how do you make that shift to online? Is it like screen sharing, or how do you, like, because when I teach in person, I'm always looking over people's shoulder and saying, oh, I see, like, let's change this about your workflow to troubleshoot or make something work. So how do you do that now that it's online?
Yeah, for me, I think the screen sharing works. What I tell everybody is that if you get stuck and if you need help, just share your screen, and that allows me to see what's going on there. And after kind of, as we work through each exercise, I give them a little challenge after each class, and once they kind of do it, each one shares the screen. So they get to the idea of sharing the screen and showing the work, and that kind of works. I've not had an issue where I was not able to debug something just by looking at the screen. So I think that I was more worried about that, but it hasn't been that big of a problem. And again, having a small group helps. I think I couldn't do this probably if there were 30 people and everybody's asking for the help.
Yeah, and I've found that at least my experience in the latter part of spring semester is that office hours are expanded fourfold. I had a lot of one-on-one chats with students who were having trouble, and just, at night, weekends, we would just sort of have meetings to keep everybody on board.
So I had a question, and this is something that I find problematic, like how to figure it out, is the question about having your video on or not, because you're right. If you can't see the faces of the students, you don't know if you see confusion or just those kind of signals that they're lost or not kind of keeping up. But at the same time, asking people to turn on their video can, especially when people are in their homes or in places, it's sort of a big ask. If you can kind of think about some people that might not want to show where they are, or if they don't have a computer that's capable of doing Zoom backgrounds or whatever it is, I'm wondering about an alternative that can be used for getting feedback from students without requiring that video. And I think one thing, like Michelle, in the tutorial that you did last week, you had those polls where you could stop and ask people, like, where are you at? Like, that seems like a good tool. And I'm wondering if we can talk about more of those kind of feedback things that are comfortable for the students if they don't have a video on.
Yeah, I think I would love to know about polls. I've heard people use it. I've not used it so far, but I would love to hear how people have used it. I definitely see that some people are not comfortable sharing the video, and I don't force them. I think that it's definitely their choice, and if at least some people do that, it's great. Another kind of thing that helps is I use Zoom, and there's this reaction thing. So I ask everybody caught it, and if they give a thumbs up or not. So that is kind of a little workaround, but it's definitely harder to do that, kind of ask everybody and then people explicitly telling, versus a lot of time people are not even comfortable sharing that they didn't get the concept. But when you're in person, you could kind of see that. So it takes a bit of practice and workarounds. But yeah, I would love to hear about polls. I've not used that, but if anybody has used polls, I would love to see how you could use them and how effective they are.
Yeah, when I've taught, this has just been obviously the last couple of months, or I've shifted like these really large in-person learning sessions, workshops to online in Zoom. That's the tool we've been using at UC Davis Library and Data Lab. And Zoom has, they have the reactions, but also in the participants menu, there is buttons for yes or no, or go slower, go faster, and a couple other options. So I will ask students to open up that toolbar and tell me, like, the answer yes or no to a question, and it's anonymous. So that's really helpful for the folks who, maybe are a little bit hesitant to say that they don't understand something and they don't want everyone to know. That can be really helpful. And that way you just kind of get a poll of like, okay, I know I've got 20 participants and 3 of them still haven't, for example, like downloaded the data yet. They need some more time. So that can be helpful for pacing, just to know, which is kind of different because in my in-person classes, they often won't tell me that, even if we use like the carpentry style sticky note system with the 2 colors for like stop and go. So it's kind of interesting that you can actually get better feedback sometimes in the online sessions because it is completely anonymous. And I find in person, people don't want to always be the person that's slowing things down, but no one knows in the Zoom session. So.
Another thing that I've seen happen is that people, sometimes what I do is once I end my workshop, I'll say, I'll stick around if somebody has more questions or wants me to repeat something. I often have people come in after the class and say, hey, can you just repeat that part? I didn't get it. So I think maybe having that kind of smaller forum, and people don't want to slow down the class, or they feel bad asking a question, slow down. So just kind of budgeting that extra half an hour after the class to have a more one-to-one or in a smaller group session, that might be a way to deal with that as well.
I'm just seeing a couple comments both in the Zoom and the YouTube chat that bandwidth can be a big issue with certain people if they don't have a good connection, that it's harder for them to keep their video on, as well as may bog down their computing system as well if their processor's working harder.
Yeah. Kurt, I saw that you recently taught your workshop online. I would love to hear your experience. How did that go?
Yeah, I taught an online workshop, and it had way too many people. It had 50 participants registered and 40 that showed up. So it was a lot to keep track of. And I used those reactions to kind of judge the pacing of the course. If I got mostly thumbs up, we would just continue. I think in general, teaching GIS and QGIS is most challenging when there's a big disparity between the slowest and the fastest student in the course. And I was really fortunate. Everyone seemed to be kind of going at the same pace, which really helped us keep on schedule and keep things moving along. But in the future, I would aim to have a greatly reduced number of students. It was a little overwhelming. Another consideration I've thought of is that students taking an online course, I think obviously, ideally, they have multiple monitors, one for the Zoom session and one for QGIS, so they can follow along and have QGIS in another window. But I would think the majority of people are just working off a laptop, and with that small screen real estate, that's going to be a big challenge for a lot of students to have to minimize Zoom and open up QGIS and go back and forth. So I don't know if anyone has any experiences or thoughts dealing with that issue.
One of the things I do in my workshops is to tell people straight up at the beginning that this is going to work better if you have 2 monitors or a really large monitor. And then if they encourage them that if they don't have both, don't have 2 monitors, that they should just follow along and watch. And then I make sure that I have the written materials available so they can go back and try after the video's over, because I can't imagine trying to watch a video and do QGIS on one tiny monitor. That's just too much.
And also having a good document like that the students know that they can always look to for reference, then they're not also trying to take notes necessarily at the same time, because then they have something to refer to, because then that would be Zoom and writing. And so.
Most of my teaching is one-on-one, a lot of one-on-one consultations and troubleshooting. And one thing I've liked about working remotely is that it used to be someone would come into our desk and they'd be having their laptop next to them. They're trying to save their battery, so their video is very dim. And I'm like looking at it from an angle and trying to see what's going on over there. But now if they share their screen, I can just see exactly what they see, and it's very clear. And that's been wonderful. But then one other thing I've noticed, or I figured out kind of belatedly, is that we're doing these sessions and often I'm demonstrating something so they can do it. And it used to be when I was in person, they would be writing everything down and taking good notes. And now I realize I can just hit record and then send them a copy of that. So if anything, didn't get into their notes, they can just watch it again and pick up that missing point. So it's been quite an improvement actually, working remotely.
Yeah, I'll echo that. In Zoom, if you're not familiar, you can just record and it emails you the transcript, I guess, after the session's over. So then you can just share that link with everybody that was in the class or people that couldn't show up or whatever. So that plus what Michelle and Diane said, if you have a written transcript or workbook or whatever, I think those two things are really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think video is definitely a blessing in this teaching remotely, because I also record all my sessions, and there are times where people just dropped off and missed like 15 minutes, and they could always catch up that on the video. And on the written material as well, I think I also share my material a week in advance, so that a lot of people say it just helps us get more familiar with the class material and what's going to be covered. I definitely had people say that it's hard to keep up with the teaching and doing stuff in QGIS. So I'm slowly trying to kind of adapt my material, and I've done this for my Python course, where I just say, hey, everybody, it's going to be a mix of lectures and hands-on. So for 10 minutes, I'm going to talk and explain this concept, just watch and see me do things. And then I give them a little exercise and challenge and say, now you go and figure this out and I'll help you and walk you through it. So I think that works better versus me trying to say, hey, let's just do this one step, let's do the next one, let's do third one. So it just, adapting your material also slightly is needed. I've not done that for all my QGIS courses, but it should definitely help if we, split the kind of hands-on and the instruction mode.
So one question I'm seeing over that's coming through on the YouTube chat is about group work and how have people approached group assignments, given that most people are remote. Do you have strategies for that, or if you can give some examples of things that have worked or haven't worked, that might be fun to discuss.
I'm not sure how relevant this is. This isn't necessarily something that I've used for QGIS, but I do have some students that are co-building a website right now. And I just made a group for them in Microsoft Teams, because we have that space here at my university, and there are places where they can have their discussions and their files all in one space there. And maybe, I'm not familiar with Moodle, but something that might have that same kind of space where everything associated with a project can be in that same spot, and people can have discussions and share files in that same logic. So just having that centralized spot, like you were mentioning in your introduction, seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, and I believe Zoom also has, I think some versions of Zoom has this kind of rooms where you could split people and they can discuss separately. I've not used that because my groups are quite small, but it could be also an option where you can give individual projects to small groups. They can talk and come back, regroup after some time. So.
I know last week we had the 2 introductory workshops. Elena Millette, who was leading the Spanish language workshop, reported that she was using the breakout rooms and dividing her Zoom participants into those rooms where there was, I don't know how many, maybe 10 or so per room. And she said it actually worked out really well. She was then floating between those rooms. It was great to see that, the students were working with each other and helping each other out when she was entering the room.
I've also sometimes tried to identify students who are doing similar type projects. So they're not working on the same project, but they have similar problems, data sets, et cetera. And I have them sort of team up and be study buddies of sorts, either formerly in person or now with a Google chat room or a Google Meet breakout.
The breakouts are great because then I think that allows for more interactivity from the people that are there. So that they know they're just talking to each other and they don't have to, if there are 30 people in the group, if it's gotten that big.
Yeah, I see comment from Hans, since he's talking about blended learning. And this is something that I've been interested in a while, and I wanted to definitely try it, where you kind of limit your in-person contact to just questions and discussions and have the learning happen over videos and written materials. I've not done it yet, but I would love to hear anybody else's experience if you've tried something on the similar lines.
Maybe I can explain a bit.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to do it in this way, and I felt that moving from face to blended even more gives a more active participation of the students. When I'm in class, they really feel that I need to spoon in every detail and, even unzipping a zip file and those things. Well, you can really get rid of that. Just have your stuff on a platform, have most things in videos, and just ask them to share the screen privately with you if they are stuck, and it can be in any time. And meanwhile, you're doing other work or prepare new courses.
And do you then have a fixed time where they could, the group meets and you have a discussion?
Yes, we plan those. We use Moodle with Big Blue Button, and we can do their Kahoots, as I wrote in the chat. So we do a quiz, and then we see that they are really eager to participate. You also want your checks and balances, how far they are. Mm-hmm. You can get all the statistics from Kahoot, and yeah, that works well.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I think it's definitely better use of the time and the best use of the in-person time for discussion. So I would definitely try to incorporate some of that.
I see a question in the chat about any issues with accessing resources from Campus Network remotely. And in my experience, we didn't have any issues. Moodle, the G Suite tools were all accessible. Our IT staff has even set it up now so that we can log into our lab machines remotely if need be. So I don't think we'll have that need, since it seems like everybody can get QGIS up and running. But if for some reason they can't, we can have them log in and access the campus network, campus lab.
Yeah, our library is working on plans for making access to certain software that traditionally students would use on our public computers. And obviously with open source software, that's not nearly the issue it is with other software programs. So that's been a great thing with QGIS.
Has anyone tried using OSGeo Live or some kind of virtual machine that students load so that it comes complete with tutorials and sample data?
It's been a little while, but I've used that approach for face-to-face workshops before, and it worked really well. So it is nice having everything bundled that way, and I think it could be a really good strategy for remote course as well.
Yeah, there was a talk during the OSGeo UK conference last month, and I don't remember, somebody presented that they use like a remote environment on AWS to spin up a complete functioning QGIS environment. And that could be, again, if people don't have access to a powerful machine or they don't have a computer that can run QGIS, this could be a way to set up your environment with data and with the configuration that you want, that people can just access.
There's a question on YouTube chat. Has anyone team taught during distance teaching? And if so, do you have any comments on that experience?
Could you repeat that? I missed that question.
With remote teaching, have you worked with the team to co-teach a course? And what has worked or not?
So I haven't done team teaching in the sense that like we have equal presenters, but the way that I've done workshops, especially when we have big ones like the intro to QGIS that we just did last week for this conference, and then a couple weeks ago for just a data lab workshop, we had more than 50 people signed up to take this class, and it's done in Zoom. So we have what we call them helpers, kind of similar to like the way that the carpentries has helpers for in-person workshops. So everyone has a very defined role, which I think helps people know how to work together, where we have an instructor role and then we have helper roles, and the helpers know like, okay, my job is to keep track of like the chat board and make sure that people get their questions answered, and then also to alert the instructor for if there's questions the instructor should demonstrate or answer questions to the whole group. But I could see if you had co-instructors that could also work. But I think part of it, since you don't have the verbal cues, that and talking to people on the side that you would in person, I think having those instructor roles really defined ahead of time is going to help some of that run a little bit more smoothly.
Yeah, I for one, I know that I am horrible at multitasking with screens and spaces. And so having somebody else look at questions coming in, and again, that's, again, being able to even, I don't know how well I would do with seeing people's faces when I'm trying to work on a screen if I had on different monitors. But at least you're right, the video gives you more of an immediate sense back in your periphery. You can at least catch some of that, but I cannot read chats when I'm in the middle of trying to do something that I have to stop and move over. So
yeah, definitely just running events with live questions and teaching just by yourself is a bad idea, and it never works well. So you definitely need a co-host or somebody else helping with the questions.
Yeah, that approach worked very well this spring when Hans van der Kwaast and I taught a 7-series webinar on our QGIS Hydro material and book. And one of us would be going through the demo and the other would be monitoring the chat and answering questions. And that division of labor worked really well.
Yeah, I think it's key, like if you're trying to do a larger workshop or teach a larger class, like you really can't, well, other people maybe could. I can't do that well by myself. Like it really, like Diane said, like I also cannot monitor the chat at the same time as teaching, and because the teaching requires already looking at materials and what I'm doing on my screen that I'm sharing, like that's already trying to handle two things we add in like all of the participant tools for Zoom or whatever platform you're using, it's too much for one person's brain to track. So I think having assistance of some sort is really key to making some of this work well. And it looks very smooth on the surface, but you may be frantically chatting with each other that no one else sees.
But I think this goes back to what Hans was saying too, that if you pre-build learning materials and snippets that people can produce before they come to the class, then the class is mostly discussions about those things, perhaps, and then maybe going through a demonstration and then doing a very pared down hands-on practice to kind of get it too. So I think in my mind right now, a lot of this just sounds like it comes down to a lot more organization before the class happens. And that's like the biggest difference between online and in person. You can't wing it as much. So.
I'd like to put in a plug and remind everyone, I know several on this session are aware of it already, but there's a QGIS certification program. And so you can apply if you haven't already, and you basically get your materials reviewed. And if you're approved, you become a certified instructing, an organization that can provide QGIS certificates to students who pass your courses or take your workshops, whatever the case may be. And they're official QGIS certificates, and each certificate comes with you donate 20 euros to the QGIS project for every certificate. So it can also be a way for institutions that have trouble contributing to QGIS to actually start contributing financially to QGIS through the certificate program. I know that's working for Hans at IHE Delft. So I put the link in the Zoom chat here. And so if you're not already a certified instructor, it sounds like some of you should be or could be.
Could you talk a little bit about what's involved with that? Just so that all of us aren't going over there to read the instruction.
Yeah, sure. So the certification program basically requires you're asked to provide your curriculum, or if it's a big curriculum, you have multiple courses, at least an example of that, because we like to check it for make sure it's up to date, that it's not mixing and matching proprietary and open source in the same lesson, for example, that it's a pure QGIS curriculum. Those kind of things are important. There's also, if there's a national QGIS user group like QGIS US, you are asked to provide that information, and then the team reviewing the materials will check in with that user group to make sure that you have a good reputation in your country, in your community, and so that's basically the review process. And then the QGIS project steering committee makes the final determination on that. And then you're basically set up with the QGIS certification platform. And so at that point, you can go in and set up your own learning center, like a location where your courses are, or at least where they're headquartered in a virtual environment. And you can set up your own courses and dates. And then there's tools in the platform for importing, a CSV of all the students who are going to get a certificate, and it will generate all the certificates as PDFs and email them to the students. So that the platform is rather nice at this point for delivering those certificates to the students at the end. And each certificate comes with a little ID number, so potential employers can go and look up to make sure that's a valid certificate in the QGIS system. So that's it in a nutshell. And like I said, at the end of a course, I usually wrap in the 20 euro fee into my courses and pass that on to the client or whoever was paying for the workshop. So that's a fee at the end of the course or the end of the semester that you basically ask QGIS for an invoice for that and pay the fee back to QGIS. So it is a really nice way to financially support the project.
Yeah, I agree. I think this, I also find it's much easier to have organizations, donate to QGIS this way, because there's a perceived value to the certificate and they're much more willing to pay extra for those certificates versus if you just ask them to donate. So really great way to have those bundled in as part of the fees that you're charging. And even individuals, I've seen that people do see the value and are willing to pay a little extra for the certificate. So love that that's supporting the QGIS project as well.
And I forgot to mention one other factor that you're asked to provide, which is contributions to the QGIS project. And that can be almost anything. It can be publishing open courseware. It can be, creating videos. It can be financial contributions. It can be contributing code. It can be writing books. It can be all sorts of things. But that's another focus of the program, is trying to get more people to contribute to the project in some way. And since the focus of this is education, getting more people to publish their open curriculum so that it can be used by others.
Yeah, that is so valuable when people have workflows that you don't have to build from scratch and just sharing that knowledge for everybody is, I've definitely taken advantage of that from some people, so.
Yeah, I think we all have. I mean, I think I've used materials from a lot of the people that are on this Zoom chat right now.
So in thinking about the materials and where you store them, what are some of your favorite places and tools to use? Like, I like to put my stuff on GitHub and do a README on GitHub, because that way anyone can send me pull requests for my spelling mistakes and such. But what kinds of stuff do you guys use? What's been successful? What have you ditched because it's not working well?
Yeah, I really like using. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. All right. So I used to I put my stuff on GitHub. I use Markdown, R Markdown, and that provides a nice interface to create my materials, and I publish that. I also found that it's just easier to kind of map that GitHub page to a website that just gives a better visibility than just having a GitHub repository somewhere. But yeah, GitHub is great. You can publish stuff there, and it maintains the version control and everything. And I just use, I put all my data, etc., on Google Drive and share those links from the class material page.
Right. Yeah, I found great success with using GitHub, and if you have a nice README, you can just turn that into a GitHub Pages website, which works really well. And then I've created I guess an official release, which basically zips up the whole repository, and then I add a link to that to the README. Although the strange part is that it's like this nesting problem where now the zip file that has the README doesn't have the link, so then I have to do it again and anticipate what the file name is going to be. But besides that little hiccup, it's worked really well. And usually the download links are super fast for people to download. They've got good bandwidth. So.
Yeah, one of the other advantages I find to using GitHub is that it lets people get my materials more quickly. So someone can just fork the repository and have the materials to work on. And because I license all my stuff open, obviously I'm wearing the QGIS shirt, so I'm a big fan of that. So I think that it's nice to have that and make it super easy for someone to just grab the materials and then they can edit as they need to, so that they can use it. Like, I just found out yesterday or the day before that a group at UCLA is going to be using my materials that I taught last week. They're going to be modifying them and teaching them in a workshop that's going to happen a week from now. So I'm really glad that they just can fork that and be able to use it right away.
And that is a great shirt.
Yeah, there's a really good question in the chat that I have too. Do folks have a favorite mirroring app for showing phone screens on a computer so you can train mobile field use? Does anyone know of an app that you can use to share the phone screen? I know I've seen Lutra Consulting's workshops where they, which we'll have next Friday, where they share their phone screen, but I don't know what they're using.
I did use an app a while back. I forget the name of it. It's been a while, but I used to teach Open Data Kit, free data collection, and that used to work well. You install the app on your phone and have people go to a web link, which kind of shows what's on the screen. I'll try to dig that up and put it in the chat.
And I see that Hans has just said he uses Screen Mirror for his Android, and that works well for him.
It sounds like what Ujaval was describing. So you have a web link and then an app, and it links to each other, and you have an in-browser view of your phone screen.
And I haven't tried this, but I wonder if you have your desktop logged into Zoom and also your phone, if you could share your phone screen directly to the chat. Again, I haven't tried that, but it seems like that would be a possibility. I'm Googling it now, and it looks like, at least on Android, yes, you can.
It probably isn't widely applicable, but there is certain settings that your Zoom subscription, in my case, for example, we do not allow copying of the chat and keeping it. So however your Zoom is set up can change some of these options and how things go back and forth. And part of the reason for that is that we have a medical school that does a lot of things with HIPAA compliant things. And they're like, we'll just turn this off so that you don't have the possibility of getting some of this data. So that's just something to think about when you're at your institution and you want to do something with your Zoom. It may not have the same permissions that other people do.
How much time do people?
Oh.
I was just, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can't even copy and paste from chat. So it's frustrating sometimes, but it makes sense.
I was just going to ask a question. How much time do you all spend on dealing with licensing issues for QGIS?
Ba-dum-bum. Yeah, I mean, related to that, actually, anecdotally by Twitter, it seems like there's a lot of instructors during, when COVID-19 hit and campuses got closed, that people who had been teaching using proprietary software were suddenly looking for open alternatives to switch to because students were having trouble connecting to campus license servers and things like that. And I wonder if people have other experiences like that where people are starting to adopt to teaching with open source software like QGIS simply because of the challenges of teaching online with this pandemic going on.
I haven't seen a switch yet at Davis. That could just be because we're still in summer sessions. I have had folks emailing me with questions about how to access the proprietary software, and our license just got switched to a situation where you have to be on the campus network in order to use the other softwares that requires a license. So so I think we may be seeing that switch over happen probably after fall when we've got some challenges, and but I'm not sure. We'll have to see. I definitely recommend QGIS a lot, especially for our Mac users on campus, which is a significant portion of our GIS users. It just makes life easier to be able to install it directly and not have to do any fancy work with different operating systems.
Is there anyone here who has not spoken yet and would like to share anything related to the topic?
Or any questions, anything we could troubleshoot or brainstorm on, stuff that's not working that you just want the Mind Hive to work on?
I have one thing that, yeah, we're all now using Zoom here, and we're of course a big fan of open source. So in my place, it's not allowed to use Zoom. So we use open source tools for our teaching. And I've already seen David mentioning Moodle. We use the same, but we also have plugins for Moodle, like Big Blue Button. And we are now having our own Jitsi. And yeah, it all works quite fine too, I would say. So are you guys also considering using open source tools for your teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've kind of looked into Big Blue Button, but I think the configuration and installation seems a bit challenging, and I'm just worried about having it work well for people. So it's just a matter of trying out and testing, which I've not done, but getting your recommendation and seeing that it works well for you, I'm more encouraged to now give it a shot, and definitely would love to have an open source alternative to Zoom that we could all adopt and teach using that.
Yeah, I know for me, I've stuck with Zoom just because it works, and you know, it eliminates one piece of the puzzle while teaching in a challenging environment. I'd like to use Jitsi, but the standard Jitsi service I found to be a little unreliable. And but I was talking with Hans yesterday privately using Jitsi, and it was the Jitsi that they'd installed at IHE Delft on their server. And in that, and you know, installed that way, it worked really well. So I think for an institution like that, Jitsi could be a good alternative. Personally, as kind of a private instructor, that might be a little more work to set up than I'm wanting to take on, but I think it's going to become a better and better option going forward.
And as I mentioned in my talk, I've sort of resigned to using G Suite tools, Google Meet and Google Chat, and sort of thinking about the student perspective and not asking them to juggle 3 or 4 different platforms, I think is important. They already have a lot on their plates trying to manage 4 courses remotely, or most of them remotely. And so I think just for their benefit, trying to streamline the tools that we use has made their lives easier.
Also,
yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, streamlining it, and so like Keith, a lot of times some of the students that I interact with, it's a one-on-one or an introductory kind of thing. And sometimes I'm interacting with students that are very new to software, period, much less GIS. And so starting in a place that they may have already used Zoom for other classes, or whatever platform it is that they're already used to, that has some kind of screen sharing component, so that you can show them exactly what you're doing when you're loading a software, starting things. It's like the best hand holding I think you can do. So just finding that base level of what they know, and then using that screen sharing just to try and get somebody that's never unzipped a file before to understand what that means.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And we don't want to be adding cognitive load on top of already learning new software, but then having to learn the sharing software as well. But I do like the idea of open source teaching tools. You know, I am using Zoom because that's what we have available, you know, in my institution. They were just like, here, use this, and it works great. But I think, you know, as we have more time to think about things, I think picking a platform for like for teaching reasons makes more sense than just use the thing that we have currently. I think matching that to our needs is probably a good choice. But at the same time, since a lot of us were thrown into this unexpectedly, using what is available and what's currently working is also a good choice until we get the chance to take a breath and figure out, what is the actual best option.
Yeah, and it depends on the student too. Like you said, the cognitive load. If they already know other things, then use the thing that's best for teaching that we end up finding. So yeah, it'll develop. It'll be a growing beast.
Mm-hmm. So I think unless I've got my time zones mixed up, I think we're right about it time for this session. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining. This has been really informative, and I think a good discussion to keep continuing. And maybe we can do this again sometime soon and touch base. So thank you again, and thank you, Ujaval, for giving us the presentation to get us started. And thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts and ideas.
Yeah, thank you. It was really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, hosts.